Let's talk about the Texas legislative session and Scott Braddock, editor of quorumreport.com. Scott, what is happening today?
Was there a sporting event yesterday? I might have missed it.
It's like for a quarter.
Here's how bad it was, Chad. I did not even watch for the commercials.
Wow.
Yeah, pandemic, schmandemic.
Yeah, you
people are saying they're all locked in their homes watching the Super Bowl. I still couldn't care any less.
Yeah, no, you didn't miss much. I can tell you that. You didn't miss much for a game, and you didn't miss much on commercials either.
Well, I figured that. Well, I was going to say, I figured that if anything good happened or any commercials were particularly interesting, people would tweet them out. And I saw a couple of things. But Chad, all this argument about social media and whether certain people are being kicked off, I have a lot of people I would love to see kicked off of social media. Of course, I'm not in charge of that. I'm just being petty because I'm looking at some of the arguments that break out. And one of the players had talked about representing Galveston, Texas, in the Super Bowl. And the discussion that breaks out online, because the guy said he was representing his city of Galveston. So someone responds to that and says, Galveston is an island. Well, yeah, it's an island, but it's also a county and it's a city. And what is your point? I was like, okay, can they kick them off of Twitter? That would be helpful. I decided a long time ago to stop arguing with people on Twitter, and my life is a lot better.
It's
the colors are brighter, cigars taste better. It's wonderful.
There you go. Hey, we've got a lot of politics going on in the state of Texas. Yes. Last week, we finally had committee assignments that were rolled out. Tell us some of the surprises that on the committee assignments, if you thought there were any.
I don't know that there were huge surprises. I think the big question was what was going to happen with Chairman Dustin Burrows, who did get a promotion, which we can talk about. But I think the chairman of public education, a Democrat named Harold Dutton from Houston, is an interesting choice. He's somebody who's, not in favor of school vouchers, but he is in favor of charter schools. So I think that there's things for people to like and to hate about that. So it'll be interesting seeing that go forward. Greg Bonin as the chair of appropriations, the budget writing committee, that is key. Of course, the most important work product of the legislature is the budget, a $250 billion document, written over a 24-month horizon. And that's the brother of the former speaker, Dennis Bonin. So maybe some grumbling there, after what happened with Bonin, his controversy and his eventual retirement from the legislature. And of course, with Chairman Burrows, he was the guy who was there in the room with Bonin when the meeting went down with Empower Texans. And as some folks have said, he was the one who was there betraying House members, and now he's the guy who they're going to have to ask for permission to have their bills heard on the floor of the House as the calendar's chairman. So an interesting dynamic. There's I would say the natives are a little restless about that.
So for those who don't understand or don't know too much about the calendars committee, because when they hear calendars committee, they're like, "Oh, okay."
What does that even mean?
Yeah, right. Exactly. But it's a pretty powerful committee.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things that outside of Austin, people don't really know about it. It probably doesn't raise your stature very much, but in Austin, it is very important. I would say the calendars committee is sort of a gatekeeper, or actually is a gatekeeper.
Yeah.
As the committee process works, you have legislators file their bills, and Chad, there are so many ways for legislation to die in the Texas legislature. It's set up as like an obstacle course. There's really only one way to get through it, but there are lots of ways to trip and fall and not make it through. The person who's a legislator would file a bill, and then that bill has to be referred to a committee. It has to be heard by the committee. It has to then be voted on by the committee, and then it can make its way to the calendars committee in the House. And the calendars committee, it's so important because the gatekeeping function is that the legislation then has to be, set to be heard in the House. They have to pick a day for it to be heard on the House floor so it can be debated. And then, of course, after that, you still have to have a similar process happen in the Texas Senate, although it's a little different there with the lieutenant governor deciding which bills get heard on the floor. Basically, the lieutenant governor in the Senate is the calendar. He decides when the bills come up on the floor. That's one way to explain that. But look, the members basically sometimes have to beg the calendars chairman to have their legislation heard on the Texas House floor. And it's not because the calendar's chairman is doing anything wrong or nefarious. It's just because there's so many people vying for attention. I was looking back at the last couple of legislative sessions, how many bills were filed and passed, and it's typically thousands of bills that they're looking at, Chad. I think 6,000 to 7,000 in the last, per session, in recent sessions. We do know that because this is a COVID session, at least here at first, as the vaccine has not been evenly distributed, the understanding is we're going to see far fewer bills passed this time around because the process I just described is going to move a lot more slowly. So we could see as few as, when it's typically thousands of bills, we could see, more like 500 or 600 bills passed total during this legislative session. And so figuring out what those key priorities are, that's going to be a tall order. As for Chairman Burrows, I will say, just according to my sources, he has been doing a lot of work to try to sort of do diplomacy with those folks who may not trust him after what happened, in the last couple of years with a big scandal. And we'll see if this is something that, I think this is the question, whether or not there's enough discontent for this to destabilize the House. I don't know that that's true, but I'm going to keep my eye on that because it's going to be on Chairman Burrows to assure people that he can be trusted in that key position.
Well, and it is, I assume for the 10 members who were mentioned in that meeting, who are they more upset with right now? I mean, are they upset with Burrows or are they upset with the speaker? Because, I mean, ultimately this was up to the speaker to decide where Burrows was going to be.
Yeah, and Phelan is trying to, as every speaker does, try to put his, imprint on the House, shake things up a bit. One thing that is, at play here is the speaker wants to, have enough continuity with the leadership so that the members feel comfortable with what's there, but, in putting some people in key positions who had not been there before, including Burrows, people will be asking that question of why did you make that decision? And I would not expect for those that are upset about it to drop their objections anytime soon. That may change as we get into the legislative process and start moving forward, and Chairman Burrows has every opportunity to prove his critics wrong, and that would be on him and not the speaker.
Let's talk about a couple of things here. And one of this, actually, it does tie into Chairman West. Over the weekend, the Texit stuff got a little bit of play on Twitter. Now, I've had on my afternoon show, I've had Representative Biederman on. I've had Leach on, and obviously two guys who are on opposite ends of the Texit vote.
Oh, did they not agree about that?
No, they don't agree with that.
I know.
It seems as though Chairman West has at least embraced the idea of letting people vote on the idea of Texit. But this is generating a lot of buzz on social media. Do you think it'll generate buzz inside the Texas House?
It doesn't seem to be going anywhere in the House. It doesn't look like the leadership team is interested in this. This is something that would require a two-thirds vote of both chambers in the House and the Senate, and I can't imagine it has anywhere close to that kind of support. What some critics have said, Chad, and I would be inclined to agree with this, is that if you have Biederman and others running around, asking people to sign a petition, which I think that they're doing that, and some other activism as well, probably what they're doing is, and this is not a new thing, this in and of itself, going around and gathering names and emails, that's a fundraising list, right, for, running for office later or for, raising funds for whatever reason. And so a lot of folks would say that that's sort of a scam, especially if something probably doesn't have any chance of becoming the law. This is not something that is legal, full stop. They've had wars about this kind of thing before, Chad, trying to leave the United States. It's not analogous at all to the United Kingdom. I know that Representative Biederman has talked about this, the idea that it's somehow similar to England leaving the European Union. The legal framework for all of that is completely different from, the states of the United States. I think for Chairman West and his role in particular, it's quite a break. Without being critical, it's a break from what past chairmen have done in this respect. There's nothing about Texit or secession, which is what this is. I know Chairman West has tried to sort of thread the needle carefully on the way he talks about that. He says he'd rather see Texas lead than secede, and then at the same time says the Texans ought to have the ability to vote on it. But in the past, chairmen have pretty much tried to adhere to what's in the party platform. The last chairman, for example, James Dickey, would talk about the idea that the platform is the owner's manual if you're the head of the party, and that you should always look at what's in the platform. Well, there's nothing about secession in there, and it also says that we basically adhere to the Constitution of the United States in the Republican Party of Texas platform. And it's also worth noting that when this was debated previously, a couple of years ago, at the state Republican convention, that when this was debated, it was sort of an embarrassing debate. A lot of people felt that way, and it was rejected by the delegates to the Republican Party of Texas convention. So this has been voted on, rejected by the Republican Party, and it's something that I don't think has any real traction in the Texas Legislature, particularly with the leadership that we have in place right now, and with all of the other priorities that are going to be debated during a legislative session. I don't know that there's much bandwidth. Even if there were more people who supported it, I don't know that they'd ever get a chance to even get around to this.
Yeah. Speaking of West, he's facing some opposition within the party.
It's interesting. He's been, and we had a longer analysis piece about West at quorumreport.com last week that people can check out. Shameless plug alert, Chad. It's right there in the Daily Buzz. He is facing some internal conflict, in the party. It wasn't really reported over the last couple of weeks, but you did have the vice chair, or previously it wasn't reported, but you had the vice chair of the RPT, someone named Kat Parks. So she's pretty new to statewide political activism. She was pushing back on this idea that the way to judge legislators in Austin is to only look at whether or not they pass bills related to the Republican Party of Texas legislative priorities. They have a list. You've seen a list of 10 things that they would like the legislature to focus on. And what she wrote in an email to supporters that we featured there at Quorum Report is pretty stout stuff. She said, if Texas legislators pass 50 bills related to Republican Party of Texas platform planks and only pass one bill from the Texas GOP legislative priorities, did we fail as a party? She said, while current Texas GOP messaging says yes, Texas Republican voters indicate otherwise. She focused on three things, Chad: law and order, lower property taxes, and the right to freedom of speech. And she pointed out that, quote, not one of those issues is a Texas GOP legislative priority. Certainly those are things that are important to Texas voters, but when the party put together its list, those things were not in there. And so the point she was making is you've got to react to what people are prioritizing in their real lives in real time, and not just stick with some list that was voted on, during a chaotic online, convention last summer, when things were in the situation all around us was a little different.
Yeah. Hey, Scott, I got to take a break. Can you do one more segment with us?
Happy to.
Okay, great. I'm going to put you on hold when we come back because I want to get to the sports betting push that is out there. We'll discuss that with Scott Braddock and, of course, your phone calls and more when we come back. Chad Hasty Show, KFYO. We go back to the phone. Scott Braddock, editor of quorumreport.com, joins us. And, Scott, one thing that we had planned on talking about was this new coalition around sports betting in Texas, because it seems like casinos are dead and gone right now, that's not going to be happening. What's going on with sports betting?
Well, the push for casinos, I'm told, is going to continue, but the prospects don't look good. You're right about that. There was some breaking news this morning that several professional sports franchises here in Texas, including the Dallas Cowboys, the Mavericks, the Rangers, all involved in this new coalition trying to legalize sports betting. I saw yesterday, Chad, that they probably didn't get the best PR ever for this rollout today, because yesterday the online sports book for MGM, BetMGM, did you see that? They had a bunch of problems where people had been betting on the Super Bowl, and there were some problems with the app, and so people couldn't settle up their wagers. What a mess that people were comparing it to the Robin Hood situation with GameStop. But, I think it's an interesting question. I think that more Republicans are certainly open to sports betting now, as something that would be legal in Texas than they had been in the past. I think the attitudes about this are shifting, but the argument as far as additional revenue to the state would seem to be the one that would carry the least weight right now, because, as you and I have talked about here on the show, the budget situation in Austin looks a lot better than it was anticipated to look by the comptroller back in July, when he had said that we might be down, in a hole as much as $5 billion or so.
Yeah.
And instead, we're probably, once they pass another stimulus in Washington, and we still have some of the money left over from the last big stimulus out of Washington, the CARES Act, you're probably not going to look at all that much in the way of cuts to the Texas budget. Now, I can reveal to your listeners, I've been reporting this out, the Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, who has been, staunchly opposed to some of these things like sports betting or increased gambling in Texas, during a Republican caucus meeting, I was told, and confirmed this with several sources, that the Lieutenant Governor told Republican senators that if a bill would result in a revenue increase for the state, he would not oppose it. And he was specifically, apparently in this meeting, asked whether that included things like legalized pots or casinos or sports betting. And the Lieutenant Governor apparently just repeated his comment that he would not oppose something if it had a positive fiscal note, meaning that it would make more money for the state. That doesn't mean that he would push for it or try to make it happen, but the fact that he might not be opposed would be certainly a different dynamic. And as you and I have talked about, I'm no longer rolling my eyes at these things that, these pushes, these various initiatives to try to get some kind of expansion of gambling in Texas. Usually this is something that just gets talked about and is pretty quickly dismissed, but there does seem to be a lot more energy around this. And one other thing interesting on the Lieutenant Governor, his spokesman and his top political consultant, Alan Blakemore, is a lobbyist for BetMGM, that online sports book I mentioned earlier.
Well, that is interesting, and it's something to keep an eye on. I'm all for it. Let's people are already betting. Let's make it legal. I mean, they're already doing sports betting in this state. Let's just make it legal. Why not? Scott, tell folks real quick what they can find at quorumreport.com.
The state budget, the hearings starting today. In fact, this hour, the Senate Finance Committee getting underway, and the legislature is coming back in town this week. We will have all the action for you at quorumreport.com to let you know what's happening with your state government. You can sign up for a subscription there on the homepage at quorumreport.com. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Scott.